Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, this is one of those remarkable days where I get to talk about something a little groundbreaking in lore terms. We're going to do a really brief overview of what you can find in the Collector's Edition of the Final Shape and the lore contained within. The lore of the Collector's Editions often contains knowledge that enhances the experience of any expansion pretty significantly, and this time it's no different. I think, however, in this instance, it's all the more important because the compiled records represent the oldest records in the canon history of Destiny. I'm not kidding. That's certainly not something I get to say every day, and let me tell you, when I say these records are older than anything we've seen, I mean they are probably older than even Arsa's recollection of the original Witness's civilization. So, with that in mind, there are some things I should disclose. This was an early Collector's Edition that was sent to me via Bungie, so many thanks to the studio and their fulfillment team for getting it to me early, and for allowing me to create this content. With how important this lore is, there's something like 3 or 4 videos on this that I wanted to create and focus on, because the topics are all centered around the Witness, the precursor civilization that created it, and their conception of the Final Shape, and what it was, or is. With that in mind, the first video here today is meant to just be a really brief overview of the general package of what you get, something that gives you a little look into the Collector's Edition and some of the subject matter of the lore that we get access to. For me, this is more of a highlights than a detailed video, and a full breakdown of what's going to come along is going to be a mini-part affair. I'll start that as soon as I can, but I imagine there's going to be more to watch over for in Destiny, with the Into the Light updates coming along very soon as well. Point being, keep your eyes glued to the channel, we will be covering this all very soon. For now though, this is a brief introduction. Just a quick word before we start this video. Needless to say, it has spoilers throughout. I'm covering the lore from the Collector's Edition, so you should not be surprised if there are things in here that potentially some might consider to be spoilers. There are, as best I can tell, no spoilers for the content of the Final Shape itself, but if you want to wait to read this for yourself, I would recommend taking a 2, maybe 3 week hiatus from my channel so that you don't get spoiled yourself. With that being said, let's continue with the video. So, what is the lore that we get with the Collector's Edition? Well, it's not untypical for these Collector's Editions to have a lore book, or in some instances multiple lore books. Lightfall had 3, and technically we have 2 with this Final Shape Collector's Edition, although realistically I only think one of them is a true lore book. The first of them, which I think is less about the lore and more about neat little references, is an autograph book. The other is the real meat of the conversation, and it's called Entelechy. To touch really briefly on the autograph book, it's a really sweet gesture for it to be a part of the Collector's Edition because of the way that it's formatted. It's like an old autograph book or a yearbook from a leavers party at the end of secondary or high school or whatever you have. The entire thing is just chock full of signatures from Guardians in the lore, or from famous figures, or from not so famous figures, all of them saying goodbye and farewell and good luck for the expedition into the heart of the Traveler. You have a lot of characters referenced and named in here. Famous Sparrow racers such as Ariadne Grease and Marcus Wren are in here. Hidden agents such as Arnor Mahal, Fenchurch Everis, and Chalko Jung are in there. Members of Saladin's Iron War Beasts from the Cabal are in there, leaving their names in English as opposed to their native Ulurant. Members of the House of Light have all signed with their messy handwriting, which would normally be used to drawing the delicate and intricate iconography of the Eliksni. The Paladins and Techians of the Reef have signed it, Ikora and Zavala have signed it, and of course Mithrax and Ido, the one who originally put this book together, have signed it as well. There are a few interesting little curios that are included in there too. It's a very touching gift in the closing chapters of a saga that really helps us to commemorate where our journey over the last 10 years or so has taken us. It's not exactly lore-dense, but it is a nice little touchstone of references that die-hard lore fans are sure to appreciate. The real meat of the lore for the Collector's Edition, though, does come from Ido, and it's not an autograph book. The autograph book itself is more sentimental. The eyes-only report titled Entelechy, which she has prepared for us, is far more important. The title word for the report, by the way, Entelechy, means someone's defining purpose or role. In this book, Ido has been working to collect sources of information on the Black Fleet and the Witness, so that we might have a better understanding of our enemy. Whilst others within Destiny's universe have grasped at straws and made uncertain progress, Ido has really blazed a trail that has given us remarkable new insights here. I think it also needs to be said, just from the information compiled in this book, stuff like this makes it very clear that we need to be taking Ido seriously as a scribe. I think a lot of us saw Ido as a part of a junior members cadre of the House of Light's infrastructure, one of the younger generation who didn't truly understand the same as the old guard. She knew the tales of her people and was very much still learning, but this gathering of knowledge that she has created has given me a further renewed sense of respect for her. She's taken a topic where we've been only able to guess at things previously and has fleshed it out with detail found in the records that she unearthed, to the point where, using those records, I can tell you how the Witness came to be from the Precursor people, and I can do so in great detail according to what happened in their society. Between these actions and her prior work in the Season of the Plunder and Season of the Seraph, I think that Ido has more than earned her title of Scribe. In fact, I'd now go as far as calling her a sage like Ikora or Shuro-Chi. She is a serious keeper of knowledge, someone to be well regarded, and this is the cold hard proof of it. In particular, Ido worked to collect records from the Eliksni's Long Drift, the time between their exodus from Reese and their arrival at Sol. In this time, the various houses and ketches would encounter vessels and artifacts of the Black Fleet. Records of these vessels were recorded within the data of individual ketches and servitors, which Ido painstakingly hunted down. This doesn't sound like a lot at first, but these records are remarkable because many of them predate the Witness. Yes, that means they're records from the Precursors themselves. And perhaps more importantly, these records were stolen from ancient ships found out in the dark, abandoned or derelict, and then the data, when it had been harvested, had in many cases been copied over so that they could reuse the file space. Ido had to use her skills in anything close to data retrieval and splicing so that she could retrieve the data in the first place. This is no mean feat. For Ido to have done this, it's quite remarkable. And I think it's fair to say that now she is my new favorite sage. She has discovered and delivered to us an organized series of records that's older than the Book of Sorrows, the records of Lubre's ruin found in Rolk's sunken pyramid, and even the testimony of Asa. So, what do these records show? Well, it's a few things, but I think they can be broken down into the following categories. Firstly, we have a series of communications between two of the Precursors. This is probably what I think is the most fascinating set of records in the whole bunch. Secondly, we have a record of one civilization's encounter with the Witness. Third, we have some logs from the collapse that show the perspective of some crew members of the Exodus Yellow. Fourth, we have an expanded record of what happened to the members of the Black Armory during the collapse and what they experienced. This is contrasted with the records from the Exodus Yellow and the records from the civilization the Witness destroyed prior, because it shows us different perspectives, and in particular the perspective of a civilization that had encountered the Traveler versus the perspective of a civilization that had not. Finally, there is a record of someone from the collapse in an Arcadia-class jump ship who was trapped in their vessel and was unable to escape the Black Fleet during those days. It also shows their perspective in their last moments, and I believe gives them a little bit of a glimpse at the Traveler. Each of these communications reveals something about either the Witness, the Precursor civilization, or the nature of the final shape as it was perceived by either of them. Ido has also made the point to annotate each of these records with her own notes at the end, and this provides more valuable insight and perspective on each of the entries. Ido also had a small conversation with Queen Mara Sov at the end of the report, which contains a small message supposedly directed at us. Of all these conversations, I've said it before, I think the most immediately fascinating ones are the ones between those two precursors, the precursor species that would eventually become the Witness. The precursors sending these messages do not use names, but instead are identified by unique ID code numbers, and these are the only ways that we can really differentiate them within their messages. Their code identifiers are HNW047622 and RS6243199. For short, that's HNW and RS. From what we can glean from these sources, we can discern the following. RS and HNW were friends, albeit friends with completely different roles and stations within Precursor society. HNW was, as best we can tell, a sort of terraformer or life creator. I think the term gardener is appropriate here for their role, but I'm going to avoid using it given that there's a clear chance of creating confusion, and it should be made absolutely clear HNW is not the Traveler. HNW was one who seeded life, who was clearly a member of the Precursor species, but it's made clear that they are not the Traveler, even though their job, the thing that they were doing on a regular basis, is described as gardening. They were at one point responsible for seeding life in a system which would grow, flourish, and would then be wiped out by an unnamed and unidentified force, although one that was clearly also technologically advanced given that they burned down the so-called garden of this precursor with ships of their own, meaning that they had to have some knowledge of space flight. The other precursor figure, known as RS, is a far more curious one. They seem to have been a doctor of some kind, but also someone who was clearly, at least initially, much more aligned with the political and philosophical influences of the precursors at large. Through their notes and the conversations with HNW, we learned that the government of the precursors involved an institution called the Consensus, much like the one that the Last City used to have, and that they too had factions of a sort. Although these factions did not have any who were paracausal in nature immediately attached to them, like the Guardians of our city would be attached to the factions of our Consensus. Instead, the factions were governed purely by the philosophical question that would determine the fate of the entire precursor race, which was a question of their entelechy. Namely, what was the final shape? What was the nature of it? And therefore, what was the purpose of the precursor people? All agreed that the final shape was the greatest good imaginable. They simply disagreed on the way in which that goodness would be arrived at. We know that these factions were divided into groups that had a series of either 1 or 3 names. The named factions were as follows. First, there was the Penitent, also known as the Merciful and the Benefic. This group seemed to advocate for the idea that the precursors should intervene in the universe to prevent harm and spread the gifts that had been given to them by the Traveler, believing that by moving the universe personally towards a greater, more perfect final shape, they would eventually reach that final shape, that their purpose was to be as shepherds for the universe. This was in stark contrast to another faction that called themselves the Nihilists, or alternatively, the Redolent or the Accepting. In their view, the universe was beyond the understanding of the precursor peoples, and it was not their place to intervene because they could not truly understand the nature of the final shape. In the past, the precursors as a species had committed their own evil acts, and therefore were not able to define the nature of the final shape. For the Nihilists, these evil acts were the guiding point of their entire philosophy, and it registered for them an inherent imperfection within the precursor people generally. It also created a belief that they should not only advocate for a more hands-off approach to the universe, but also a belief that the final shape likely involved their own extinction due to their own imperfection. They had caused strife, and the final shape was self-evidently good and perfect according to all. If they themselves had been a cause of evil, then perhaps they, as Nihilists would believe, did not deserve to be a part of that final shape. But it's not necessarily bad for them in their perspective, because if the final shape was evidently good and perfect, their destruction, their extinction, should they allow it to simply happen, was of little consequence. For a perfect universe was out there, and it was important for them to simply step aside and allow it to exist. This, of course, is in stark contrast to the Penitent, who again believe that they should intervene in the universe instead of letting it sit by. This also gives us a little commentary on the name Penitent. It's clear that this name arises because of the knowledge and reflection on those evil deeds that were performed in the past by the precursors on each other. This is their penance, guiding the universe towards a more perfect shape. Allowing those beneath them to learn from their mistakes is their philosophy. This is why they believe they should intervene on behalf of all those who would develop beneath them, so that they might all reach the final shape. There is also a third factional group, called the Solipsists, though they are mentioned mostly in passing, and they don't have any additional names or titles that represent their faction. Their name means that we can at least guess at their philosophical position, even if it isn't one that is explicitly communicated to us. In short, they must have seen the final shape as something only relevant to them and their civilization. The idea at the heart of solipsism is that the only mind or mental state that you can confirm to truly exist is your own, because it's the only one you know exists. I think, therefore I am. Common cause for you to sit there and believe in solipsism. This perhaps implies that this faction leaned on the idea that the final shape could be determined only by a limited group of parties. This could have been limited to the Traveler itself, or it could have been a view that allowed the solipsists themselves a degree of freedom to enable the final shape as they saw fit, within their own minds. It could alternatively be applied to the whole of the precursor race at the detriment to all others, allowing a paradise for a limited few who they knew existed, rather than a whole of the universe that might not also exist alongside them. A greater perfection for the few that they knew would exist. Regardless, there's not enough information to speculate on this any more than what I've already said, and anything I do say about the solipsists is indeed speculation. It could be entirely wrong. RS in the early days would align themselves with the penitent quite fervently, but this was something that would eventually change, and contact between RS and HNW would almost always feature mentions of the philosophical idea of the final shape and what it truly was. In fact, the longest communication between the two of them is an active debate on the nature of the final shape and going into the minutiae of what it must be. Their disagreement is one that is revealing because it shows the greater break at the heart of the precursor civilization, something which Asa has also been able to corroborate. This idea that they themselves did not know the fundamental truth of their own purpose, and without the truth of their own purpose decided upon, they were at the risk of not understanding what they should do with the gardener's great gift. We can infer from these records that by a certain point in time, this search for meaning, this search for entelechy, was in fact the whole basis of the precursor society, and yet they did not have the answers. Perhaps more troubling, though, is the final communication between HNW and RS, where it's made clear that the Society of the Precursors had finally reached a consensus, but only with the destruction of the solipsists and nihilists, the ascendance of the penitent, and the decision to merge themselves into a single consciousness thanks to the magical power of the veil. This is the moment that records the creation of the witness, and it is incredibly important because it shows us that there were certainly some who did not acquiesce to this merging of peoples. There were some who had reservations. There were some who most certainly did not desire to become one, unraveled and then spun back together into this greater entity. Ido apparently found all these records on different ketches. And you know what? It's an incredible treasure trove of stuff that was just lying around, because it will help us determine the greater designs of the witness itself. It also tells us of the penitent philosophy at the heart of the entire witness's agenda, and it tells us of what it has been doing the whole time, and why it has been doing things in the way it has. I kid you not when I say that I believe these are some of the most fundamental discoveries in all of Destiny's lore, and that without these revelations we would not be as prepared to face the witness as we are. Context is key to understanding our enemies, and it's critical knowledge of the witness like this that is going to potentially make a difference. These are just the most outstanding parts of those transcripts to me though, and there's a whole lot more of them for me to cover, so in the next few days, as well as covering the live streams for Into the Light, I'll be looking into covering these transcripts and giving you all a look at the relevant information that's included. Entelechy is bound to be one of the most important manuscripts in Destiny's lore ever, so I'll be making a full breakdown of it over the next few days. In the meantime though, I hope that has got you excited for what's coming next. I am going to immediately start working on a video that breaks down the relationship between those two precursor individuals that were mentioned, RS and HNW. That is my first port of call. In the meantime, just know that that's something I'm working on. Shorts are still on the way, other video content is still in the barrel, and I am working on other things in the background. Big projects are on the way, it is a very busy time. So if you appreciate all of the context being lent to you by simply me looking into all of this, please go ahead and show your appreciation by leaving a like and hitting subscribe and all the other typical stuff in between. Of course, know that as per usual, your viewership as always is quite enough for me though, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Por audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.